Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here and welcome back to the railway. Today I'm reviewing one of Bachmann's finest looking models of all time. Today's loco was first released in 2009, which means if it was a person, by now it would almost be an adult, which is a scary thought. But anyway, today's loco is this. It is the Great Western City class and the most famous of the class, City of Truro. And this is a famous engine in real life for all sorts of reasons. It's preserved, it's appeared in films, and it was also arguably the first locomotive to reach 100 miles per hour. Now, unfortunately on that subject, it was never officially recorded, so there's a bit of doubt as to whether that happened, but whether it did or not, the myth has certainly stuck around. Anyway, this model of it was launched 16 years ago as part of the National Collection in Miniature, and it was exclusive to locomotion models of the National Railway Museum. And I bought this from Rails of Sheffield, which is a bit odd, isn't it? If it's exclusive to the NRM, how come I bought it from Rails? Well, I'm not really sure. I guess the thing is, the locomotion exclusives are very expensive. And that's fair enough because the proceeds go to support the National Railway Museum, which is a good cause, but nevertheless these exclusives are more difficult to afford than non-exclusives. So maybe the locomotion model shop was struggling to shift these, maybe they just wanted to shift the stock and they unloaded them at Rails of Sheffield. But I bought this about 5 years ago, brand new, for £139.99, which back then was a damn good price, and by today's standards it certainly is. But anyway, as you can probably tell through the front of the box, this is a gorgeous, gorgeous loco. I've not featured this model for 5 years now, so I think it's well overdue for a new review, up close and personal. We're going to look at all of the details, features and the mechanism, which I don't think I've done properly before. So let's enjoy this one, City of Truro, a beautiful loco and a beautiful model. Let's get started. Alright, the City class. So a Great Western locomotive and a 440, not a 460. 440 is one of my favourite wheel configurations, which is yet another reason why I love this model so much. Anyway, let me show you the end of the box. So this is 31-725 NRMB. It's the City class number 3440, City of Truro, with the Great Western monogram on it. Produced exclusively for the National Railway Museum, and it's DCC ready with a 21-pin DCC socket. And if I show you this end of the box, you can read, if you want to, a little bit about the National Railway Museum exclusives. It does talk about how these are sold exclusively through the locomotion model shop, which of course turned out not to be true, but usually they were. And then if I show you the back of the box, you can read about this class in real life, or City of Truro. Again, if you want to, feel free to pause and read that. But for now, let's open this up and let's find out what you actually get with this model, because I can't remember. You know, I see the loco quite often sitting on the shelf, but I don't really ever look inside the box. In fact, I never do. So let's open this up. So we've got the loco here. Let's take a look first at the paperwork and instructions. I guess this is the one we want. Alright, so some basic info on the left, running in, curves, body removal. This is quite important. So you've got to remove the axle box tie bar to get the loco body off, and then it's just screws to loosen from there on in. To remove the tender body, again, it's screws, and I think that is where the DCC socket is as well. More information down below. As you can see, also this includes where to fit the accessories, which is useful. And then on the back, we've got the exploded diagram, well, semi-exploded. It doesn't go and show all of the separate parts, but this is quite a complex model, despite being 16 years old now. And this focuses more on the mechanism. I guess you can see the motor, no flywheel, unfortunately. Can't remember whether it's a 3 or a 5-pole motor in this one. Then a list of replacement parts at the bottom there. Alright, and that's just about the Collectors Club, I think. Now, let's see. So this one was produced in 2017, I think that means. Yeah, 08, 010, 17. So yeah, this has been in production for quite a long time, although I don't believe it's available at the moment, unfortunately. Maybe it'll be back one day, not too sure. Anyway, I can see we've got a wealth of accessories in the top here, including a feature that I really, really like to see. So let's start with that. So look at this, City of Truro, really high quality etched nameplates there. Plus you've got the numbers that you can put on the side of the cab. Those are awesome. Yeah, to say I only paid 140 quid for this and it's got nameplates of this quality, that is quite surprising. And then we've got, oh look at this, we've got builder's plates, loads of different plates actually. Even today, it's rare to get as many etched plates as this, but yeah, they are wonderful. And then there's a whole host of different detail parts here. We've got an alternative front bogie by the looks of it, or at least casing for the front bogie. And the instructions say that this is included should you want a version of the bogie without the NEM pocket on it. But as we can see, this version does have the NEM pocket on it as well. So that was a bit of a cock up, wasn't it? And yeah, there is a NEM coupling fitted to the front of the loco too. So yeah, they done goofed there, I think. Anyway, there's brake rigging, various pipe work, and all of the buffer beam details, including some movable screw-link couplings, which I like to see. So it's very, very heavy on accessories, all sorts of detail parts, plus those etched parts, which I really love to see. But let's take a look at the model now. Here she is, opening carefully, in this really lovely early Great Western green. So the finish, I would say, is pretty good. I think if Bachmann were to do a new batch of these today, we'd probably expect to see a slightly better finish on the boiler, that is slightly glossier, because these days they really do nail that balance between gloss and matte. They get a really good satin balance. This one, yeah, it's not quite as rich looking, I suppose, but generally speaking, it still looks really lovely. Anyway, loco and tender are connected, so I will lift these together and I'll give you a bit of a better look. Yeah, look at this thing. It's absolutely insane. The paintwork really is what stands out because it's incredibly complex. All of that lining, all the different colours, just makes this look beautiful. And I do have a version of this model in a much simpler khaki livery, and it's still gorgeous. It's still very fancy looking, but it does lose a lot of the grandeur that this one has with all the lining and such. Of course, the other thing about the City class is the outside coupling rods. That's a really lovely sort of old-fashioned look that we don't see that often in model form, but it was quite a thing back in the early 1900s and the end of the 1800s. Really iconic to the City of Truro as well. But yeah, beautiful model, fair amount of weight to this, I would say, and the running plate is die-cast, so it does feel quality in the hands, as much as the body itself is just made of plastic. But I'll pop this on the scales in a second and let you know what it weighs. For now though, let's have a bit of background on this loco in real life, and then I'll show you this thing up close. The Great Western City class, also known as the GWR 3700 class, was made up of 20 locomotives built between 1902 and 1909 to the design of George Jackson Churchward. Characterised by their Belpaire fireboxes and lack of domes, locomotives from this class are always immediately recognisable. After their initial production, the class was improved and modified for several years, and eventually they were fitted with superheaters and several other modifications. The class would be the first 440 design of the Great Westerns to feature a tapered boiler, which would eventually become Churchward's standard number 4 boiler. This member of the class, as I mentioned earlier on, was reportedly the first to exceed 100 miles per hour. And this loco, City of Truro, still exists today and is in fact the only member of the class to be preserved. She was restored in 2004 at a cost of £130,000. By 2013 though, the loco was in such a state that it was withdrawn ahead of its boiler ticket expiring due to leaks and other issues. Sadly, it has been out of action ever since. So there she is up close and personal for you, Bachmann's City of Truro. And like I said towards the start, I do think this has to be one of Bachmann's finest looking models of all time. It just is exquisite, isn't it? And it's got me wondering whether the original 2009 release was as exquisite as this. If, as the box of mine suggests, this was made in 2017, that would make this one of the later examples. Did the 2009 model look as good as this? Presumably the tooling hasn't changed since then, but are there differences in the way that these were decorated? If you know the answer to that, please do let me know. Either way, beautifully painted, beautifully detailed. We'll jump into all of that in just a second. Let's talk about the weight then. So it weighs in at 297 grams, which makes this a pretty weighty 440, one of the weightiest actually. So the Dapol D-Class, which was another NRM project, that was much lighter at 231 grams. The Hornby T9, which has a die-cast body as well as the D-Class, was 209 grams, so that's much lighter. And Bachmann's very similar Earl class is still lighter at 266 grams. So a decently heavy model this, largely thanks to the die-cast running plate here and die-cast chassis, as we'll see on the inside a bit later on. Anyway, let's jump in and talk about the decoration then. So under the lighting, the finish actually does look pretty good. I do think Bachmann would probably do a slightly better job of this, as I say today, but by all means this is a pretty darn good finish. And there is a lot of lining on this loco. Yes, on the boiler, but the splashes are also lined with multiple different colours. The side of the cab is very, very decorative. As you can see, we've even got lining around the number plate here. And remember, we've got etched versions of this number plate included with the model, plus this nameplate here. Again, very good quality etched versions of that. This plate above the front driving wheel, we've got an etched version of that. Basically, any plate on this model is printed on like this out of the box, but there's a much higher quality etched version included as well. I love the sort of reddy colour to the frames as well. That is something that I always really enjoy with pre-grouping locos, and indeed this is all lined as well. The steps are picked out too, which looks fantastic, and there's even masses of lining on the front bogie. I mean, and look at the bogie. Look at all the detail here. Axle boxes picked out, springs, these look like they're separately fitted, and then, like I say, all of that lining. It's just incredible. Here's a look at the front buffer beam, which has the running number printed onto it. And here's the smoke box door, which also has detail picked out. You can see the hinges here are painted. And I guess while we're here, we'll talk about the detail here too. So we've got the separately fitted smoke box dart. And if I'm very careful, I can open up the smoke box door to reveal some of the details inside. How about that? Yeah, you can see the ends of the tubes there. A really, really impressive feature. It's not very useful. It's a bit like sprung buffers in that it really doesn't add much to a model except for that enjoyment when you just think, oh, it'd be cool if the smoke box door opened, and then you piggle at it slightly and it does. Amazing. Anyway, let's talk about the level of detail then. So one thing I'm not too keen on with this loco is the front bogie. You can see the splashes at the top here are kind of just cut off and they disappear. Now that's not really how they look on the real thing. The tops of the splashes are not actually visible, they disappear under the running plate. Here it's much more obvious that they just kind of end. Now I suppose they've done that so that the front bogie clears the running plate in model form, and that's fair enough, but it must be said this doesn't look great. And I almost wish they'd included an alternative front bogie which had the splashes in full, or at least had them disappearing underneath the running plate rather than just ending like this. Because the front bogie that we do have in the accessories bag appears to be identical to this one. It's supposed to not have this NEM pocket on the front, but it does, so it's literally identical, which makes it, you could say, slightly pointless, or if you were being completely honest, which I will be, entirely pointless. So yeah, pity about that. Otherwise though, the detail is stunning. So real metalwork, that's a big point. So we've got these chrome finished handrails, which really do look great. Yes, on the side of the boiler and firebox and smoke box, also on the running plate as well, above the steps. And we've even got a real copper effect chimney. Well, I say copper effect, I think it is real copper. I don't think it's an effect. So that is great. So much better than painted. And the whistles as well, these look like they're turned. And again, you just can't beat that from a quality point of view, can you? This looks great. What does stand out though is the bonnet here. That is clearly just a plastic part, and it's got a much plasticier finish than the other metal pieces, which I think by 2025 standards does sort of stand out, although 10 years ago, 16 years ago, that was all perfectly acceptable. Anyway, let's go back down to the bottom. You can see we've got the beautiful cast wheels here, which are also painted, hidden quite nicely by the frames so that they just poke out very slightly. Then we've got the outside motion here, metal rods as you can see. Not much detail on the cranks. I think these should have the lathing holes in them, but they don't. There's just sort of like a moulded seam line on there instead, but you know, not too bad. And then along the running plate, we've got these separately fitted springs, which have a lot of detail to them. Looks like these look exactly like lamp brackets. So are they spare lamp brackets sitting on the side of the frame there? That's interesting. And then we have real lamp brackets at the front, of course. The buffers are very, very fine, and I think made of metal, but not sprung. And then underneath the boiler, you can see there is some representation of the valve gear. I suppose that looks a little bit feeble by today's standards, but then again, there are some models that don't have any detail at all between the frames, so this is better than that. And then we have the cab, of course, with the glazing, and even some of the window frames are painted, which looks great. We've also got an adjustable tender full plate here, as you can see, and if you were to closely couple the loco and tender, I guess that would be closer to meeting the tender, whereas here it's just sort of dangling in midair, which is a bit odd. And then the cab interior itself is quite impressive. We've got a lovely sort of copper effect on some of the pipework here. Separately fitted parts, looks like the regulator at least is separately fitted, plus a few other separate components, and we've even got paintwork on the gauges as well. Again, did the early 2009 version of this have this much cab detail? If so, this would have been very, very impressive. Another thing I love about this is the tender. I mean, look at this. Doesn't this just scream early Great Western? Yeah, I love the early sort of balanced shape of this, especially with this raised section here where the coal load goes. A really, really cool tender. Made even better, of course, by the decoration and the lining, which is incredibly, incredibly detailed. And we've also got the monogram there, which I like a lot. That's a cool little print, isn't it? And then the underframe is very, very well detailed. It's obviously reminiscent of the loco, especially the front bogie, really, with these picked out springs and axle boxes and such. Yeah, incredibly decorative. The tender's also got the chrome finished handrails, which look fantastic, plus a lot of separately fitted and painted controls around the front. Then we've got the coal load, which I guess is going to be a die-cast metal coal load. It looks like the typical Bachmann coal. Slightly odd shape to it, I suppose. It looks a bit like a shiny fish lying in there, but if you wanted to remove that, I'm sure you could do. And then here's the detail around the back. Again, if you wanted to fit a real version of this plate, one was included. And then you've got a similarly detailed buffer beam, again with no sprung buffers, but separately fitted lamp brackets. Oh, and I almost forgot, we've even got the water scoop fitted down beneath the loco there. And if you wanted to add the brake rigging, you could do, and that would make it even more detailed. Finally then, couplings, we've got the NEMs pre-fitted to this model, so we've got a slightly pivoting one on the back here, and then the NEM tension lock fitted to the front bogie. I suppose you could remove this one at the front to make it more realistic, and I'd be interested to know whether other versions of this did actually come with the front bogie without the NEM pocket, or whether all of them just came with an identical one with the pocket like this. Is that just a mistake with mine, or was it a mistake with the whole batch? Do let me know. Anyway, a beautiful model, as I keep repeatedly saying. And not only is it beautiful, but the build quality is excellent as well. As you can see, it's not a simple model. There's a lot of detail here, especially in the decoration and in these separately fitted parts. And yet it's all been presented absolutely brilliantly, which is great to see. And admittedly, this is something Bachmann is very, very strong at. Anyway, that is the level of detail. It is quite tremendous, as you can see. It is missing a few things. It doesn't have the sprung buffers, it doesn't have any lighting in the firebox or anything like that, and perhaps some of the subtler details would be better if they were done today. But on the whole, you can't look at this and think, wow, that's an old dated model. It just isn't. It looks marvellous. So with that, let's move on. Let's talk about performance and, of course, the mechanism. So there she is then, looking absolutely gorgeous down onto the track, and I'll show you how she runs in just a second. First though, let's talk a little bit about the mechanism. Now, yeah, this mechanism's not my cup of tea. You know, it just about does the job, but this was always marketed as a premium model. And up until the point where I bought this at a fairly discounted rate, it was quite an expensive model as well. So I think a better quality mechanism, even for 2009, would not have been too much to ask for here. So first of all, the tender pickups, they're not the greatest. I'm not a big fan of this type. So you've got wiper contacts which touch the axles of the tender. You know, these work okay, but they're not the most reliable in the world, and only some of the tender wheels have them. The middle tender wheels don't have pickups at all. Besides that, we've just got the loco driving wheels with traditional wiper pickups on them. So that means really we're not doing that well on pickups. We've got 7 wheels per rail, but only 4 of them pick up. That could have been better, I think. Here's the drawbar design, which is your typical Bachmann drawbar, at least for the most part of the 2000s so far. Yeah, it's not very good. Every time you lift up the loco, most of the time it becomes disengaged. I don't know why they're not just screwed together, frankly. And then you've got this bizarre connector which connects loco and tender electrically, but for some reason the plug is behind the front axle of the tender. So obviously the wire has got to go either above that axle or below it, neither of which is acceptable really. So yeah, this looks rubbish, and from the outside it looks really bad as well. I mean, they've put a water scoop on the bottom of the tender, so they've paid attention to the detail there, but then at the front of the tender you've got this. Yeah, I don't know. It seems like such a museum quality loco, and then things like that just make you think, what? Why, Bachmann? Just why? Anyway, the base keeper plate on the loco is held on with 3 screws, and it is hardwired in place, so you can't remove it entirely for servicing, but it does sort of pivot upwards at the back like this, so at least you can get access to the pickups to clean them. We've got no bearings on the driving axles though, which is poor, and the axles sit into square slots cut into the chassis. Again, that just seems unnecessarily poor for what was supposed to be a premium locomotive. You can see though that both of the axles are driven, and that means that I suppose the somewhat fragile coupling rods are not actually being used. They're just cosmetic, they just look nice as they spin round, they're not really doing anything. Then for body removal, I left the rear screw out, and I also took out the very front screw. And before you can remove the body, you've got to do this little trick where you disengage the drawbar, otherwise that'll stop the chassis from lifting out of the body. And here is the chassis, which is made of metal. It's reasonably heavy, but it is very, very tiny, and as you can see, the front bogie is not part of this. That's technically a part of the body. And the body itself is packed with metal. You can see here the front of the boiler and smoke box area full of metal. That's another reason why this loco is so heavy. But speaking of the motor, this is just a 3-pole motor, not a 5-pole motor. Again, that seems a pity, and there's no flywheel fitted to this either. It's just got a couple of resistors, presumably to drop the speed a little bit, because as we're going to see later on, this is quite a fast-running loco. I would imagine without these resistors, the speed would be even higher. That might be fun to try one day, actually, but not today. Anyway, to get access to the DCC socket, you have to remove the tender body, and you do this just by removing the 2 screws at the back of the tender. And here's what's inside. It's a fairly empty tender, really. So you've got your 21-pin DCC socket, and then there's a capacitor at the front there. That's 100 microfarads. Maybe that's intended as a substitute for a flywheel. Yeah, I don't know, a flywheel would have been better though. No speaker pre-fitted, although as we saw in the accessories bag, there is a sort of speaker housing provided, so that if you did want to fit this with sound, you've had some of the work done for you. And then the back-to-back gauging came in at between 14.3 and 14.4 back-to-back, which is pretty close to the standard, so no issue with the gauging at all. So there you go, that was the mechanism. Yeah, relatively poor quality, I think. Serviceable, so that's a good thing. You can access most of it to clean it and lubricate it, which of course is very important on a loco that doesn't have any proper bearings, etc. But I would say, given the poor quality of the mechanism, the performance itself is actually pretty fair. So let me run it for you. I'll run past at 50% speed. In fact, let me move the rolling stock, which I haven't showed you yet, and I'll bring the loco by at half power. It is a speedy loco, as I've been saying. So that's 50% speed. 100% speed is like insane. I don't really dare do it because it's going to crash into the coaches. I'll do it forwards though. Ready? Yeah, so yeah, I think really the gearing could have been better. You know, in real life, the top speed of this loco was about 100 miles an hour, and there's some debate as to whether the real thing could do that. So there's absolutely no need for this model to go more than 100 miles an hour scale speed. So yeah, perhaps a bit better gearing to favour the low speeds would have served this better. But you know, it certainly can do the 100 miles per hour, whether or not the real thing could. Anyway, what's the crawl like? Let me show you that. I'll turn this up very slowly. Obviously the driving wheels are quite large on this loco, so the crawl's not the easiest thing. Yeah, it started, it's stopped though, hasn't it? So a bit more. Yeah, it keeps wanting to go. A bit more. And a bit more. There we go. So, yeah, it's fairly slow. It looks pretty good. It's a little bit coggy, isn't it? And it's certainly not the slowest I've ever seen. But yeah, on the whole, I think given the gearing, that's not too bad. So yeah, the performance from the motor is quite decent then. Oh, not so good backwards. Let's try that again. Turn up slowly. Yeah, noticeably more coggy in reverse. Maybe that's because I tend to run this loco forwards mostly. A bit more. Yeah, it's not as good in reverse. But then again, it's not got a flywheel, it's not got a 5-pole motor, so it's not dreadfully surprising, is it? Torque-wise though, it seems to be alright. Let me give it 50% on the buffer test. Yeah, you can see it's turning its wheels. Slowed down a little bit, of course. It's not racing at its normal speed. But yeah, generally, I think the torque is absolutely fine. Pulling power is alright then. So the loco's pretty heavy. I don't know how much of that weight is actually on the drivers because the front bogie is quite heavily sprung, to be fair. So the tractive effort only came in at 0.17 newtons. I'd expect that to be a bit higher given how heavy this loco is at nearly 300 grams. But, you know, that's okay for a small 440 from the early 1900s. You wouldn't expect this to be doing a whole lot more than that. That should be about 13 coaches on straight and level track. Yeah, it's not terrible. So I've set up 5 Hatton's Genesis coaches. I was trying to think of what Great Western rolling stock I've not run with this loco before, so I've gone with those. So with that, let's back up and test the couplings. Well, at least the coupling on the back of the tender. All right, here goes. Right, I'll try and do this as steadily as I almost tempted fate there. Yeah, I'll try and do this as steadily as I can, assuming it's not going to lurch again like that. Here we go. Turning up gradually. That seems a bit inelegant, doesn't it? Yeah, go on then. Let's do it less gently. Alright, that worked. Now, was that the loco's coupling or the coach's coupling that fouled things there? I don't know. They seem alright now though, don't they? Right, so I'm not going to go too quick. I think I'll go for about 40% speed. And we'll see how this looks with some coaches. Right, reasonably steady start. Here we go, up to about 40. Ooh, seems a bit slower with coaches. Let's go for 45 then. There we go. Alright, so on the middle line I've got my other Bachmann City class. And this one was actually my first experience of Bachmann City class. This one's City of Birmingham. And it came with the Bachmann ambulance train pack. Or was it a set? Might have been a train set. Either way, yeah, it's in the khaki livery, which, like I was saying earlier, is totally different from the early Great Western green, but still quite a handsome loco, I would say. And then on the inside line, we have another loco in the same sort of ilk. This one's known as the Dean Single, and this is Lord of the Isles. And yeah, this is in a similar livery, which is why I've run this today. I have to say though, some of the metalwork, especially the domes and the bonnet, they look so much better. And the thing is, we've just had the Caledonian 123 announced as a new tool project. It was Rapido that did that. Will we see the Dean Single redone? I would love to. That would be amazing. But anyway, for now, let's focus on the City class. How does she get on with these coaches? All right, here she goes. Reasonable speed, I think that. Onto the second radius. Yeah, a bit of a slowdown there. But she's done it. And to be fair, she's not wheel slipping, so she didn't slow down because of a lack of traction, I suppose. So yeah, she's certainly heavy enough to haul a decent rake of Genesis coaches. And I would guess you could probably add 2 or 3 more before you started seeing any issues. So yeah, the slow speed's not brilliant, but at the higher speeds, she's a perfectly capable loco. And I'm certainly glad she weighs what she does as well, because that allows her to haul a decent amount. So yeah, it's a really, really lovely loco, this, isn't it? Especially from a distance. I think up close you can start to see that this model is getting on a little bit, but from a little bit further back, the decoration and the level of detail that is there is certainly enough to sell the illusion, I think. So yeah, still a beautiful model. This may be a model that we see Bachmann bring back, possibly with some upgrades, because I don't think this is too far from modern standards that a few tweaks to the tooling, perhaps a slightly redesigned chassis, by which I mean an entirely redesigned chassis, could quite easily bring this closer to modern standards. And then perhaps this would be a £200 locomotive, but only if they put the work in, I would say. But yeah, a lovely, lovely model. Really enjoyed revisiting this one today, and it actually puts me in the mood for more Great Western, actually. So if there are any other early Great Western locos you'd like to see me re-review, please do pop them down in the comment section. I don't think there's any that I've not already covered, but if there are, likewise, do let me know what those are. But there you have it, the Bachmann City Class. And now then for some ratings for Bachmann City Class City of Truro. So, level of detail, let's start with this. Now in the past I have given this 5-star on detail, but the thing about me going back and updating my reviews is that it allows me to take a fresh look at a model and talk about how it shapes up against other models now, not in the context of a few years ago. So I think now, by 2025 standards, the level of detail would be 3.5. Now, on the plus side, there are amazing things about this loco. I think the metal parts on board, the chimney and the whistles especially, they look fantastic. The painting and decoration, that's really, really good. And on the whole, the moulding's not bad either. Generally, there's lots of definition. The cab looks really good as well. But in 2025, it's missing a few things. I mean, a matte effect on the smoke box, that's something that's really noticeable on the real loco. This doesn't have that. Doesn't have sprung buffers, of course, no lighting in the cab, and the front bogie doesn't look dreadfully realistic either because of the splashes. These don't detract massively from the model, but they do a little bit. I think new models released in 2024, 2025, these really do take accuracy and detail up to the next level. I suppose this loco is lagging behind a little bit there. Performance though, I believe I've given less than 4-star in the past, but now I'm giving it 4. I think actually comparing this with some newer releases, the performance is better than I remember. I do think new models sometimes don't run as well as older models. I don't know if the quality of motors has dropped in recent years, but yeah, I was expecting this to be more of a 3-star on performance, but for me really, looking at this now, I would say it's easily a 4. So the crawl's not the greatest, it can go fairly slow, but because it's geared to run pretty fast, yeah, the crawl's not amazing. Also, the gearing does mean that it runs quite fast, which is good for City of Truro. It is a fast locomotive in real life, but maybe you don't want it charging around at that speed all the time. And so to make it look a little bit more sensible, you do have to turn the speed down on the controller, which does reduce its torque a little bit on certain curves. You can see it slow down very slightly, but even so, I don't think I'd give this less than a 4 on performance these days. Generally, for what it is and considering the mechanism, the performance is fine. Now, the pulling power is not amazing by any means. It's a reasonably heavy loco, so it can haul a decent number of coaches, at least given the prototype. I measured 0.17 newtons, or about 13 coaches on straight and level track. So it's not an absolute powerhouse, but I think for what it is, the pulling power is adequate. Mechanism though is pretty poor, especially by 2025 standards. So on the plus side, it is nice and serviceable. You can get to most aspects of this mechanism without too many issues, but I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel for positives there. So first of all, just a 3-pole motor in this loco. It doesn't perform badly by any means. I do think it's a good quality motor, but we've seen much better performance, I think, from 5-pole or coreless motors. No bearings on the driving axles, that's a pity for what used to be a very expensive model. Square slots for the axles to sit into as well, not great. We haven't got that many pickups on this model, only just over half of the model's wheels pick up power. Again, I think that could have been better. We've got that horrible drawbar design, which is annoying because, like I say, every time you lift up the model, it comes uncoupled. But you've also got those awful wires stretching between loco and tender, which are visible. They catch on the front tender axle. I just don't know why they did that. There's also no flywheel on the motor either. So yeah, looking quite dated by 2025 standards, but the loco does work okay. Obviously, I have serviced mine quite regularly over the years, and that is something I recommend, especially with locos that don't have proper bearings on the axles. Keep those clean, keep them lubricated, that should minimise wear. Anyway, quality though, I've given 4.5 star. Generally, it's a really good quality model. The build quality is excellent. The application of the decoration, to me, is really, really good as well. 1 or 2 moulding lines visible on the body if you look really closely. These don't detract too much for me, but they mean that I can't give it the full 5 star. So 4.5, otherwise really, really good. A fantastic quality model, I would say. Value for money then, now take this with a pinch of salt. I paid £139.99 for this about 5 years ago. That was heavily reduced from the RRP, which I think at one point was £150. Again, take that with a pinch of salt because it's probably changed quite a lot over the years. Obviously, by modern standards, that is a really, really good price, which is why I've given it 5 stars. If Bachmann were to bring back City of Truro though, would it be available for £139.99 or £149? I highly, highly doubt it. I think, knowing Bachmann, if this was to come back, we'd be talking a good £200 for this now. But I'm not going to mark it down for that because that isn't something Bachmann's actually done. So I have to go on the price I've got. It's 5 star. I don't know if it would have been considered a 5 star back in the day by me, but looking back, if you can get this for 140 quid, it is definitely a 5 star. Well worth every penny of that, I would say. Overall then, that is 7.67 out of 10. That's a pretty good score, really, for a loco that first debuted in 2009, and that's a grade of B. So into the logbook it goes, where it is 7th place, just above the EFE Rail Class 144 Pacer, and below Hornby's A3. So if Bachmann bring this back, or if you can find this loco second hand, is it one that I'd recommend? Yes, this loco is a real beauty, and of course in real life, such an iconic loco. Yeah, I think if this is something you're interested in and you feel like you've got to have a model of this loco, then yeah, I think this is one I could recommend. Alright then folks, well there you have it. That was my 2025 review of Bachmann's City of Truro. And yeah, it's a really enjoyable loco, I would say. Visually, it is excellent. Mechanically, it is poor. And performance-wise, I would say this is adequate. So I think that's the most succinct way I can sum this one up. Certainly an enjoyable loco. Like I say, if you're interested in the early Great Western locomotives, this one is a must-have, I think. Anyway, do let me know what you think about this loco down in the comments, but for now I think I will leave this one there. So thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you again very, very soon for another review. Alright, cheers folks, you take care.